It's Rob!
Tony!
We're in gaming!
And that's you!
Hello gamers and welcome back to the end. I'm Rob.
I'm Tony.
And today we're going to be going over the top decks you can expect to see on ladder. We made this video just about a month and a half ago, and within that month, some decks have changed, some decks have stayed the same, and we've stumbled across some new decks, and of course, decks leaving. I just said the same thing like twice. Hello gamers and welcome back to the end. I'm Rob.
I'm Tony.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the most popular decks you can find on ladder. Again, this is the most popular decks. This is seeing a deck every 1 in 30 games is not popular. We're talking about the decks that you can repetitively expect to see on ladder throughout the ranks. There's a couple of them for each class. Some, of course, have more than others, and you'll find some similarities to this the video that we made a month and a half ago because, of course, not a ton can change, but a decent amount has changed. So, without further ado, we've actually changed the layout of how we're going to do this video. You saw that little nice transition there. We also have the deck list on your guys' right-hand side.
What side is it on?
My left-hand side. I've also included the dust count, guys. If you look at the bottom, it actually has the amount of dust, so you can stop asking me how much dust it costs, even though you can calculate that on your own. But I've done that for you now.
So, that's right.
There we go. Tony, I guess we could start off with you doing this deck. This would be the Miracle Druid.
Oh, Miracle Druid. This is a fun deck.
Oh, this is Cthulhu Druid.
Yeah, I was like, what the fuck? I was like, wait,
that's the next deck.
Where's Auctioneer? Cthulhu Druid. It's a deck that almost everyone's familiar with. As soon as Old Gods came out, this was like the first deck in everyone's mind. It revolves around pumping up your Cthulhu and controlling the board and making good trades so that when you play Cthulhu, you get a big fucking smack to the face, you have a big body on, and also, Twin Emperor Veclor is really good survivability, Dark Arakoa is really good survivability, Druid the Claw, really good.
A lot of taunts to protect you from
a lot of anti-face cards, so things like Swipe, all to protect you. It's almost like a control Druid in a way, because, it's all about living to be able to play Cthulhu, Cenarius, Veclor.
Just a lot of powerful creatures, a lot of powerful taunts. Does a really good job, in my opinion, against aggro decks.
Definitely.
And a little bit more on the expensive side, like most Druids. Again, also, if you look at these deck the deck lists, this is basically the foundation of a controlled or a Cthulhu Druid. It's not the specific, this is Cthulhu Druid, this is what it looks like card for card. No, this is my build of Cthulhu Druid. All of these deck builds are my builds. They're not necessarily the builds on Tempo Storm. They're not necessarily the builds you're going to find on Hearthstone or you're going to find the pros playing in the tournaments. These are my builds. Change them as you will. They are basically just foundations for you to see how the deck will work.
Another thing, you can take off 1600 dust from that because that includes Cthulhu.
Yes.
So, it should be free unless you join really late. Then I don't think you get Cthulhu.
Yeah, I think they stopped that promotion a little bit ago. So heading into the next deck, we have the Yogg Druid deck. This basically, it reminds me a lot about Token Druid in a sense, because there's a lot of cards such as the Mire Keeper, the Violet Teacher, and the Living Roots that summon the tokens, and then from there you can go ahead and you can use your Power of the Wild to boost them up, and then if you have Fandral on the field, it's just crazy, the amount of damage you can do. There's also one Savage Roar. You can actually change the mulch with the Savage Roar to run 2 Savage Roars, just so you can draw it a little bit sooner, because I found that when you play this deck, a lot of the times you have like 3 or 4 creatures on the field, but you're always looking to draw Savage Roar. Like, it's just always a card you're looking to have, unless you draw it, of course, in your opening hand, and that's just bad luck at that part. But this deck, I would say it's a little bit more, I wouldn't say it's as consistent as the Cthulhu Druid, as the Cthulhu Druid is a very powerful deck right now on ladder, but I would definitely say the Miracle Druid is a very fun deck to play. You can rank up quite quickly because it's very aggressive, and overall I think it's a pretty powerful deck. It's really hard to play too, so anything you wanted to add? Or?
It's just the reason it's very inconsistent is because if you have your token cards in hand and have no way of immediately buffing them, they're just going to die. Like Wisp of the Old Gods, it's like you either buff up all your creatures or you make a bunch of 1/1s. Your 1/1s are just going to die to something like a Swipe, a Hellfire, whatever. Yeah. Even if you bump them up, it's just not always consistent because they die to CC very easily.
Also with Druid, you can draw into a lot of your Ramp, Wild Growth, Innervate, and don't draw into your creatures.
Super dry draws.
Yeah. Or you draw into your Yogg, Cenarius, Whiffs, and Emperor, and then you have no ramp to play them. So that's where the inconsistency comes from. So we're going to be moving on to Shaman here. Since I talked about the last one, I suppose me and Tony can switch off. And I don't know why it's not going down, but it's literally just not
Scroll.
Down. Okay.
There we go.
I shouldn't say that. I'm a silly goose. Okay.
So this is mid.
Aggro Shaman.
This is aggro. Oh yeah, this is aggro. Okay, so aggro is more. Oh yeah, abusive sergeants, sergeant squires.
Yes.
This is obviously aggro in sense that you have a lot of 1-drops, a lot of very powerful early creatures that are very sticky as well, especially Argent Squire. Very, very, very sticky. Yeah.
That's it?
Oh, what did you just do?
I muted it because I'm a very silly goose. I forgot to mute it.
Very nice. Yeah, so you have a lot of an insane amount of early game. You have Ancestral Knowledge, so you can draw into more cards and also buff up your Tunnel Trogs, the Overload, Flame Tongues to buff up adjacent creatures, Totem Golems just because they're fucking amazing, Argent Horse Rider to get in that immediate damage with maybe a Rock Biter. Doomhammer always run 2 in aggro. It's like in mid you can, we'll talk about that. You sometimes run like 2, but mostly
in
1.
Mid, yeah, 1 Doomhammer in mid is about even.
Thing from Below becomes
That's
very
an odd
cheap.
number, not even. My bad.
Thing from Below becomes a very cheap, strong creature in the late game. So it's like you can play essentially, and your Totem Golems reduce that as well. So you can
and
play
your Flame Tongues and your mana. There's no mana tide here.
No mana tides.
I was thinking mid range, but yeah, any sort of totem you play. So whether it comes from your Tuskar Totemic as well, whatever totem he brings out reduces the cost of Thing from Below. So you're not necessarily always paying.
Actually, because it summons a Britain.
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't. Thing from Below, you're never going to end up paying 6 mana for it, which makes it so it can fit into the Aggro Shaman because you're not paying the full price for it. So. Aggro Shaman, very kind of simple deck to play. I wouldn't say simple deck to play, but it's a simple deck in the terms of what you're trying to do with it. Push as much face damage as possible, as quick as possible. Not really making many trades unless it's a super favorable trade to make. Looking into mid-range Shaman, again, the build, you can slightly change it, whether you want to run 2 Doomhammers, 1 Doomhammers, 2 Thunder Bluffs, 1 Thunder Bluff. This is kind of up to you and what you're playing against. In my opinion, I like this build a lot. It also runs the 2 Mana Tides and the 2 Lightning Storms, which I've seen a lot of people take out. But because of how much Zoo and how much aggro's on ladder right now, also if you go against another mid-range Shaman or an aggro Shaman, you'll find that the Lightning Storms are super helpful, and they're really, really solid. Some people actually like...
DE. What about DE? Do people ever...
DE?
ED, not
Elemental
DE.
Destruction?
Yeah.
Oh, that goes in aggro. That wouldn't necessarily go in mid-range.
Really?
I've put it in mid-range before, but I found the Lightning Storm does the same thing.
It essentially does.
Yeah, because if you're Lightning Storming against an aggro deck, most of the time the cards in an aggro deck aren't going to have more than 2 or 3 HP. And if you're looking to ED against maybe a mid-range deck, by then you've lost. If you're needing to ED against another mid-range deck and you weren't able to make valuable trades with your deck, it's not looking like it was a great game for you anyway.
Solid point.
Yeah. So, it runs, I wouldn't say it runs the same as aggro, but it runs very similar. It has a lot of the same early game cards, Rockbiter, Tummeltrog, Flame Tongue, Totem Golem, Feral Spirits, and Tuskar Totemic. So the early game's relatively the same, but what changes it is the end game. We've got the Azure Drakes, the Thunders, the Fire Elementals, and the Windlord, of course.
I love Fire Elemental.
Such a good card. Moving into the next class, we're going to be talking about Paladin. This is more specifically N'Zoth Paladin. Are you familiar with this deck at all, Tony, or not so much?
I've seen it enough to understand it in tournament play. It's very, very, very control heavy. It's all about controlling the board. So you have things like Wild Pyromancer and activate it with spells like Equality to clear board, Consecrates. You got your True Silvers to constantly hit people in the face, and you play a bunch of Death Rattles as well, so that when you're making trades early in the game, you're getting the Death Rattles, they're going off, and then eventually your N'Zoth, which is your big 10 mana creature, can bring out a whole bunch of crazy shit again. You get a second Tyrion.
More so Tyrion, Sylvanas.
Yeah, Sylvanas, Cairn Bloodhoof, all these very, very sticky, annoying cards. And once you deal with them, you have to deal with the repercussions of killing them. Yeah. So it's very difficult deck that if you can't outrush them, you probably will lose just because it's just so powerful in the end game.
Yeah.
With all the big threats like sometimes even people are running the double Ragnaros.
Yeah,
it's rare, but
it's actually that's becoming not so rare. This build with only 1 rag, they're actually taking out Lay on Hands and putting in the second the Ragnaros, the Fire Lord, and also the Light Lord, and the reason being to give it a little more oomph in the late game, because now
rag is a lot of pressure.
Yeah, but I found in my playstyle at least that if I'm going against another aggro deck, I base it off basically having the Justicar Trueheart to finish them off, because them dealing with the 2/1/1s every turn is just too much. Most of the time, also getting the double Tyrion from N'Zoth is insane, unless they make the really valuable play. We're playing against maybe a Shaman or a Mage, where they're able to hex it or steal it or some sort of polymorph it with their Sylvanas or something like that. So
I also noticed you have Enter the Coliseum, which is always hilarious to me because I hate that card.
Oh man, I like Enter the Coliseum.
I know
it's
you
like
do.
it
always works out for you though. Every time I play that card, it just doesn't work out.
It just
for
reminds me of a bad brawl.
Why would you define it that way? That's not
Because
helping.
it's close. I'm a warrior player, so if I see something close to like my warrior class, it's just like, oh, let's try to fit this in here. See how you do. All right, so we're gonna be looking at the Zoo Warlock. If you've played Hearthstone at all, and you've played at least 2 or 3 games, you should know what Zoo Warlock is.
You've seen this at least once.
It's a very popular deck created by Reynad himself. Just kidding. Not really though.
Popularized
by Reynad. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Back in the day. So the deck aims at very similar to the aggro shaman. A lot of sticky minions, a lot of minions that are semi-hard to kill, and if they can kill them, you can just kind of play more minions, and you basically bombard the field, you control the field, and it's not like a hunter deck where you're always going face. With Zoo, it's almost you make trades, and you make value trades to the point where you're able to kill off your opponent's minions, continue having creatures on the board, continue being able to draw because of the Warlock passive, and then have huge burst potential with the Power Overwhelming, Abusive Sergeants, Leroy Jenkins, Doom Guards. It's just this deck.
It's also a very cheap deck.
Yes, this deck, if you notice, I mean, we wouldn't call it the cheapest deck because it does have the double Doom Guard, double Defender, and or 1 Leroy, and it has the brand, but you can actually run this deck without the brand and without Leroy Jenkins, and it'll still perform well if you decide
And that saves you a lot of dust right there.
Yeah, like you can build this deck very cheap, and it'll get you to, I would say, at least rank 5 quite easily. I mean,
easy.
Yeah, if we tried our hardest on the free-to-play account, I'm pretty sure our Zoo deck could easily hit rank 5. But I just don't have the time to put into it.
It's funny because Zoo transformed from a almost like mid-range type deck back in the pre-standard. When you had like Jiraxis and things, or not Jiraxis, Mal'Ganis.
Well, that was
and things
my
like that.
Zoo deck. It was like a tempo.
You had a
Warlock.
very strange like mid-range Zoo that worked, but you had like your 9 drops. Like there was higher drops in that deck.
Well, only because of Void Callers at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
The only reason you were able to play maybe a Lord Jiraxis or a Mal'Ganis, mostly a Mal'Ganis in a possible like tempo Zoo or mid-range Zoo was because of Void Caller, but that's not around anymore.
Thank God.
Reno Lock.
Reno Lock. The one of deck. Well, it's not always one of, but most of the time you want it to be one of because you want to make sure you can get Reno off.
The deck I played almost the entire season of like a couple months ago.
It's so good. It revolves around a lot of, as much as it can do to control the board. Only be able to run in 1 Hellfire, 1 Mortal Coil, 1 Doomsayer, and things like that can limit it. For the most part, though, it has so many ways to deal with so many things. So if you draw well, you can usually take on any deck.
Yeah.
It has the ability to take on any deck in any matchup. So that's one way. It's super versatile.
Yes.
But you have to draw well. And it all revolves around keeping your health up. No Jiraxis in here.
No Jiraxis. This is the combo Reno Lock. So if you notice, there's the Alex Straza, Leroy Jenkins, Power Overwhelming, Faceless Manipulator for that 20 damage combo.
Yeah. Okay. So this is that. Is that the most popular variation right now?
Yes. Right now, there's also the more, I would say, slow Reno Lock with Lord of Jiraxis in it. And I say Lord of the Jiraxis. It's just
Lord Jiraxis.
But this seems to be what most of the people in the tournaments are playing, what you're mostly going to see on ladder. For some reason, the Alex, it's just the burst because it's able to beat, it's better against other control matchups.
Yeah, most definitely.
Because of the burst. And it also has the ability to clear the board early on with cards like Doomsayer, Demon Wrath, Hellfire, Shadow Flame, things like this. So also if you draw Reno in your opening hand, that's always a good thing. But the potential of 20 damage is just, it's so good.
It's a lot, especially if you can follow that before with an Alex and get them down to 15.
Exactly.
You're almost guaranteeing a win.
Exactly. Like if it's like Freeze Mage in a
But with
sense.
that combo, you do need, just keep in mind that with the combo, you have to be careful what's in your hand because you have to emperor the right pieces.
Yeah, you only have to emperor 1 piece.
Yeah.
Only 1 piece.
As long as you get 1 piece, you can get the full 10 mana.
Yes, and the combo is Leroy Jenkins, Power Overwhelming, Faceless Manipulator. So if you can, when you play Emperor, make sure one of those cards is in your hand. And if it's not, you've changed your win condition to something else, which is okay. You can change your win condition in this deck.
There's a lot of threats in here. Ragnaros.
Yeah, of course. This deck is full of threats. Also, there's a version of this deck that runs N'Zoth. And the reason I didn't include this is because it's not super popular right now. The most popular Warlock right now is Zoo, without a doubt. I would say 80 to 90% of ladder is Zoo.
Oh, yeah.
Then it comes down to like maybe 10% is this Reno variant, and then maybe I would say 8% this Reno variant, and then 2% is off. but it's still out there. But again, it's not the most popular deck. It's out there. I know it's there, but we just can't cover every single deck in Hearthstone in a video. It's not possible. All right, we can. It'd just be like 4 hours long. Looking into the Mage, this is going to be the Tempo Mage created by Hotform. This is very similar to it, if not the same. Actually, it's not the same because I ran I run 2 Flame Strikes.
Also, Hotform performed with the Nexus champion Sarad in his second place performance.
Out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. It did him well, I guess, but
so this is if
too
we're
much RNG.
This is the RNG deck. They call it Casino Mage just because of all the random things that can happen, whether it be through Fireball, through the Yogg Saron, and also through the Faithless Manipulator. There's just Arcane Missiles. There's
Flame Wakers.
The Flame Wakers. There's just a ton of randomness to it, but it's very consistent in the sense it does a lot of randomness.
Oh yeah.
But it does a
lot of burst.
A ton of burst. Starts off well. It uses its spells to either deal with creatures or to deal a huge amount of burst face damage. What's proven to be very, very powerful in the early game of most games is Cult Sorcerer Arcane Blast. Being able to play a 2-drop that's a 3/2 and then using what is a 1-mana spell to deal 4 damage to a creature is insane. So whether you're dealing a Totem Golem, an Azure Drake, another Flame Waker, just dealing 4 damage to a creature for 1 mana is insane. And then also that combos well with the Sorcerer's Apprentice or the Flame Waker, so it'll be a free spell. And then the Flame Waker, of course, will do an additional 2 pinks.
Conjurers are also commonly found.
Yes, Conjurers, instead of the 1 Azure Drake, you can change out a Conjurer, or you can change the Polymorph. This is my build of my Tempo Mage. I know most of you are like, double Flame Strike! Okay, so let me just point this out here. It always seems that you have Flame Strike, or you have Flame Strike in your deck, right? And you're playing against another deck. Like, man, Flame Strike would be great this turn. Next turn, Flame Strike. It's always Flame Strike will be like a nice draw to have. It's never like a bad card turn 7 on. Of course, it's
especially
bad
in a zoo heavy meta.
And then so once you use your first Flame Strike, you're like, fuck. I no longer have any great field clear. And you're like, man, I wish I had another Flame Strike. And this is where my
and hence the legend of the second Flame Strike is born.
Yeah, so, and then people, they already don't really expect the first Flame Strike because a lot of the Tempo Mages take it out. So you play once Flame Strike, like, all right, I didn't really expect that. I might have guessed it a little bit. But so we got it 1. But when you play the second one, boy, oh boy, they're
a little bit surprised.
That is a surprise. As Alex would say, I'll give him a shout out, the Shaman surprise. All right, going to the Freeze Mage.
Freeze Mage. Very control-heavy deck. It revolves around clearing the field early on, making sure you get all the pieces in your hand to be able to deal tons of damage to the enemy face at the end. You have your secrets like double Ice Block, double Ice Barrier. Ice Barrier gives you effectively 16 additional health on top of your health. Ice Block essentially saves you 2 lives. It gives you like a 2 1-ups from Mario.
Yeah. Also, guys, for those of you still tuned in, for every deck that we've either done a deck guide on or a deck testing, I will post the annotation to that deck on the side, along with putting in the description in which the order we've mentioned the decks. We'll also put a thing in the description going over when we hit each class and the timer on that. So you guys, if you're just looking for one specific class, you can kind of just go there. And I should have probably mentioned that at the beginning, but too late now.
That pretty much wraps it up. The idea is just to get them down. Have all the pieces of the puzzle in your hand.
It's an OTK deck. It's a one-turn kill. You basically set up for an Alex Strauza, cast a bunch of spells, kill him, and for the time being, you're using your spells to either...
It's a very hard deck to play, too.
Nullify the field or stop them from attacking.
Very difficult, high skill cap deck.
Yeah. Going into Warrior, there's quite a few Warrior decks. I believe there's 4 in this list. The first one is going to be Pirate Warrior. This is a very aggro-based deck. It is all face, very fast-paced, and most of the time you're not going to be doing trading. If you are, it's with your weapons to keep your creatures alive. I wouldn't say there's really much to it past that.
You play cards go face.
Yeah,
upgrade your fucking 5-drop Arcanite Reaper to a 7/4 and go face.
Most of the time you're just upgrading either the Arcanine Reaper or the War Axe, depending on your situation. But you never really want to upgrade your N'Zoth's first mate weapon unless like that's the only play to do. But again, if you're looking for specifics on how to play the deck, of course there's the deck testing and deck guides on the side. But very fast paced. This deck is actually very cheap and it'll do quite well on ladder.
Yeah, take off 1600. You don't really need Leroy. It's just another win condition, and you have yourself a really cheap, effective deck.
Yeah.
This is
Tempo Dragon Warrior.
Tempo Dragon Warrior. I actually don't know much about this deck. I haven't seen it much. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is going to be Tempo Dragon Warrior. As we've known, Tempo Warrior is a very powerful deck in Very common. I forgot what I was going to say. Besides it being very common and very powerful. But we've seen a lot of tournaments, and it's performed very well, very consistent. But then people said, why not put some dragons in here? And that's exactly what's happened. And now, it seems that in the tournament setting, we've actually migrated away from the original standard tempo warrior to dragon tempo warrior, which seems to be even better.
Fun and interactive.
And it's... The reason being is just the early game, this deck's insane, mostly carried by Alex Strauss's champion, which if your opponent is playing Shaman, which as we've seen a very popular class, and they play Tunnel Trog turn 1, you play Alex Strauss's champion turn 2, you can kill the Tunnel Trog, and you still have a 3-2 on board. So there's just a lot of synergies in the deck, performs very well, and surprisingly, Dragons have returned in this form. Very solid deck, and you will see
Alex Strauss's champion's a 2-drop 3-2?
It's a 2-drop 2-3. If you have a dragon in your hand, gain charge and +1 attack. It's crazy.
Oh, wow. 2-drop 3-3 charge. That's right. I was trying to remember the stats. Okay.
Here's the standard tempo warrior, or the standard tempo warrior.
Oh, standard tempo,
Yeah.
Or mid-range, depends on what you like to actually call it.
Yeah, but very similar to the dragon tempo. I would say a little bit slower and probably not as good. It has a little bit more late game in here, though.
I like the late game, though. You have cards like Arc Thief or Fom for like you get the +10/+10.
It's actually, you can run
burst.
him and or Varian.
Yeah.
Some people like Varian. I like Thief. I like the value.
Yeah, well, the thing that's great about the Varian rendition of this is it can bring out like a lot of big things right away. So you can bring out your core Krons, you can bring out your Ragnaros for the end of turn, Hellscream. It's a Karen, Bullet of Brave, things that don't necessarily. There's not an insane amount of battle cries that like Varian would have anti-synergy with.
Yeah, I would say Malkrok is probably the worst one.
Yeah,
but he's still a 6/5.
Yeah, exactly. He's still a solid body. But a lot of late game, you have Gromash for finishers with Blood to Icor for a big hit. Some people were running in a Rage as well for Ragnaros or Gromash combo, that's always been a thing, popular depending on the deck. A lot of draw to be able to constantly put up threats and deal with the board. So
yeah, those are where your battle rages come from.
Mm-hmm. Very solid deck.
What is this?
Oh, is this your control?
This is the Control Warrior. So this is the deck I've been using for the past 2 seasons. Last season I was able to hit Legend with it, and the season before I believe we hit Legend with the same deck. Maybe a couple cards here and there. But this is your standard Control Warrior deck. I thought it was going to be dead after Old Gods hit because we lost.
Dude, you've been fucking dominating with the deck.
The infamous Deathbite has been destroyed along with the Shield Maiden, which is... She's a good card. She wasn't as good as Deathbite, but man, oh man, Deathbite was just too good, guys. Rib 4 weapon slot. Anyway, the deck revolves around, again, controlling your opponent, withstanding, kind of outvaluing them on the resources. For every, 1 card you can use, you can take out 2 of their cards. Brawl is your field clear. You have your end game, such as Jeskar Trueheart that will stand the last of the game, so you can just keep armoring up. Fatigue will never really bother you unless you're playing against another warrior. Sylvanas, Gromash, Rag, and Sagoth are kind of your huge end game guys, and when those guys are dead, by the time then you've probably played Elise, you can map, and then you get yourselves a refresh of legendaries.
Oh, Sagoth.
And then everything below Brawl is basically just your mid game and your CC/field control to kind of be able to buy the time to play your all cards below Brawl, and then of course Elise.
Look at that dust cost though.
That dust cost is quite expensive. But again,
not a starter.
But
deck.
again, a 2,000 dust cost deck can beat this. It all depends on kind of what deck you want to play. A zoo deck can crush Control Warrior.
Easy. You can totally
with the right hand, any deck can beat Control Warrior. Again, it's just kind of how you play the deck, your opening hand, and how proficient and how well you know that particular matchup. So moving on to the next class, we're pretty close to done here. I believe we have Hunter and Rogue left. We've actually left Priest out of this, considering they're not a very common class to go against. And then if you go against Priest, you're either going to go against like N'Zoth Priest or Control Priest, and it's just like it's not going to happen often. It's just not even worth mentioning. This is going to be your Death Rattle / mid-range Hunter.
Yes.
Mostly mid-range, though.
It revolves around, there's not many traps. There's Explosive, which is good anti-aggro. Tracking to be able to draw in, you can kind of search for, the cards you need at that moment. Unfortunately, it destroys the cards afterwards, which makes me sad. Quick Shot, you got Removal. You have Animal Companions to summon hopefully taunts. Deadly Shots to kill untargetable things or big creatures that you can't really get rid of. Such as like Sagoth, you can just fucking kill Sagoth because you don't target it. Unleash the Hounds for anti-aggro, Carrion Grub, and Houndmaster to bump them up. Cult Master for draw, Harrison weapon. You just have a lot of ways to effectively deal with the board and your opponent, and then you play N'Zoth after playing a bunch of Savannah High mains and other things, and you just win. Call of the Wild is absolutely broken. It really made Hunter. I feel like that card in specific has really made Hunter come back really strong.
If Hunters didn't have Call of the Wild, this deck wouldn't be a thing. But Call of the Wild is just so good. It's the best day drop.
It's amazing.
It's huge. It's a huge tempo swing, and it's a crazy top deck. Again, you guys may be looking at this deck and saying, why is there explosive shots? Why is there N'Zoth? Why is there only one Unleash the Hounds? Why is there only one Kill Command? Why only one Eaglehorn Bow? There's so many questions, and there's not enough time to answer them all. So the reason I have Explosive Trap is because everybody's playing Frozen Trap. So when everybody's doing something, you should probably do something else because everybody knows what you're doing. That is not a good way to play a strategy game. The strategy of a game is to outwit your opponent.
A mix-up.
So many games I pretended like my explosive traps are freezing traps, so they won't attack with the one creature they have on the board. And by the time they attack with their creature, when they summon another one that they want to return to their hand, which is a low-cost creature, it dies to explosive trap.
And they missed out on like 2 turns.
Yeah, exactly. So it also makes it so you don't have to run 2 Unleash the Hounds, because the reason you run on 2 Unleash the Hounds is because you want a good matchup against a Zoo. And most of the time, Hunter has no great field control besides Unleash. So if you're running 2 explosives and you don't have to run freezings, you can take out 1 Unleash, which is a bad card against control, and put in a N'Zoth, which is good against control. So there's a lot of things I've changed in the deck to kind of counteract the meta and where it is currently. Again, this is my Hunter build. You don't have to follow it. You can go to tempeststorm.com and copy Reynard's build and become legendary. Or you can copy a tournament build or something else like that. This is my build. The foundation is basically the same. And by the foundation, I'm just 2 Call of the Wilds. That's the foundation of every Hunter deck right now. So moving into the Rogue deck, this is going to be our last deck, and Tony's favorite class of, I know Tony did the Hunter class, but I'll let him do the Rogue as well, since I know Tony enjoys the Rogue class.
I haven't been playing as much as I should, but this deck is very cool. It's Miracle Rogue. Different variation than what's existed before, but get an Auctioneers to be able to draw an insane amount of cards with your free spells like Backstab, Prep, coins generated from Tomb Pillagers allow you to draw even more cards, and Violet Teachers to be able to generate tons of tokens, Azure Drakes to bump up spell damage and draw more. There's a common theme. It's called draw. Yogg-Saron, of course, is not always an option. Yogg-Saron is more of an oh shit button for all of these decks. When you're in a bind, when you are about to lose, and you have nothing else to play to save you, you play Yogg. That's really, it's just another win condition of the deck.
And you also don't have to play Yogg in the Miracle Rogue. No. I just choose to play him because if you're going to play Miracle Rogue and the name of the deck is Miracle, I think Yogg, if any card,
it's appropriate.
Kind of meets that Miracle standard.
He is the most Miracle card.
So I just figured, I think he matches the deck quite well. Most of the time you won't need him because the Miracle Rogue does miracle things for miracle victories. But if you need a miracle at a particular time in a particular...
Yeah, so after you draw all your cards, you have cards like Deadly Poison's not a huge win condition at all. But it's good for field clear. But you have your double Cold Bloods, you have Eviscerates, and...
Huge burst.
Yeah, you just have so much face damage. A lot of people are even running Blood Mage Thanos for that extra spell damage as well. Not always, but it does work well because of the draw function of it.
So this is my build, guys. I actually excluded Blood Mage because I don't run Shiv, and I also don't... It's a good card, don't get me wrong. Some people call it a staple. I don't want to play it, so I'm not. So you're more than welcome to put in Blood Mage here and take out something like a Yogg. But that's basically what I replaced Blood Mage with, because I said, what's going to win me more games? Blood Mage, Yogg.
You also do not have Zeril.
I do not have Zeril.
Zeril is also another
I don't like him.
Optional card. It generates you a cheap spell for miracle activators, combo activators, things like that. And also when it does, it generates you another spell, miracle activators and combo activators. So Zeril's, most people say that's a staple. Rob, you have a very interesting relationship with that card. I just don't think it ever gives you the toxins you need at that moment.
Yeah, it's a random. It's no miracle. It's praying at that point.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right.
That should wrap it up.
Yep, so this wraps up all of the most popular decks at the moment. I will do my best to kind of release this every time I feel as if the previous episode of this has been outdated to the point of which we need to update it. A lot of these decks, again, they're going to stick around for a while, so...
The meta will eventually even out, but right now it's still pretty early in the season.
I would say it's evened out enough to determine what are going to be probably the most popular decks.
Yeah.
Of course, every month there's going to be that new flashy deck that everybody's going to try
streamer
out.
made.
Yeah, that some streamer made, whether it be, token Paladin, extreme...
Miracle Priest Shadowburn.
Yeah.
Like something crazy.
There's always those, but again, those aren't the most popular. So as always, guys, I'm Warshack, of course.
I'm Tony, of course.
And happy whatever the hell day it is.